Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you happen to be watching this morning in the morning. Welcome to the Real National Dialogue with myself, Jonathan Mokes, and Paul Berkowitz. Paul, as ever, let's do a wellness check-in. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you, Jonathan. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good, thank you. Just got a bit of a whiplash from all the political stories that are hitting us fast and furious this week, as ever. So we've got a lot to discuss as ever. We have I would say it's probably fair to say, crisis in the criminal justice cluster with those bombshell revelations from Sunday. Good to discuss that. We have the Trump tariffs, which are, I think, very, very worrying for the economy and a number of sectors. So good to talk through that. The ubiquitous by-elections, I think it would be good to reflect on the Motherwell by-election from last Wednesday, which I think was quite interesting, particularly from an MK vantage point. There are three by-elections being contested today as we record. And then lastly, there have been developments in the city of Johannesburg with the election of a new speaker. And I know, Paul, you've got a few things to sort of highlight there in terms of the kind of centrality around the ANC. So let's dig straight into it. I'm sure our listeners and keen South Africa watchers will have picked up the press conference given on Sunday by the Provincial Police Commissioner in KwaZulu-Natal, Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, which really contained a number of bombshell revelations, mainly about the Police Minister, Senzo Mchunu, shelving the political killings unit, centralizing it all into the office in Johannesburg, going to Shadrach Sibiya, where things have gone to die, and dockets are not being followed up on, but also importantly, some dodgy allegations of connections with Vusumuzi Cat Matlala, Mr. Brown Mokgotsi, disclosures of WhatsApp conversations, but all again sort of detailing what the provincial police commissioner believes to be collusion between organized crime and the incumbent police minister. So quite a set of bombshell revelations to start the week on, Paul.
It's a lot, Jonathan. And as you said, it really goes to the heart of many things. It goes to the heart of the criminal justice system, as some opposition politicians and many social commentators have said. It goes to the heart of the rot within the ANC. It touches on the themes that we spoke about last week about ministers and MPs that are untouchable because it seems that Senzo Mchunu's fingerprints are all over a number of very dodgy things here. And it speaks to also the issue of generally, which you've touched on, how safe do we feel as a country in day-to-day lives in terms of crime, but also on an existential level. The ANC is essentially a criminal organization at this point running the country. And the rot within the policing and the criminal justice system, because as you said, there's also allegations that members of the judiciary are compromised in this net of dodgy police doings.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing for any citizen of South Africa. I think crime is, and you're right, Paul. I speak about this often, and for me, one of my performance indicators for government and for this GNU is whether by the end of its term, South Africans will feel a little bit safer. Crime often doesn't feature as the kind of number one issue affecting South Africans when polling is conducted. But if you do qualitative research and sort of dig deeper, it's very, very, as a South African, crime is just part of your daily lives. It's in your subconscious. We all know this. It always lurks around as a fear, and it's kind of become something that we've priced in. But it is really a quality of life issue, and too many of us are victims and threatened by dreadful crime. And the fact that you've got these allegations now where a police minister who is responsible for overseeing the organization that's meant to keep South Africans safe is allegedly so connected in this sort of, I suppose, underworld or organized crime world, it really leaves South Africans feeling incredibly vulnerable, and incredibly worried about what the political priorities are. I think what again is frustrating as South African citizens watching is again the sort of slow speed of a reaction to this. So, you know, well, I was about to say non-ANC parties, but obviously all other parties are non-ANC. But it's difficult to describe the DA as opposition, although they are acting in opposition. I think they've been very quick. They were very quick off the draw in asking for the necessary parliamentary sort of procedures to be enacted. But Cyril Ramaphosa was predictably lax in his response. He was obviously at the BRICS summit in Brazil. He said that he would attend to the matter when he returned. Not very clear, not very decisive. I think it required a far more decisive act that I'm going to do X, Y, Z. It'd be interesting to know, Paul, what you think the possibilities are. Fikile Mbalula has sort of intimated that, people like Senzo Mchunu will have to present themselves before the ANC Integrity Committee. But I mean, come on. I mean, the ANC
Well, Jonathan,
Integrity, yeah, go for it, Paul.
you mentioned the ANC Integrity Committee, and I think it was John Eaton yesterday or today who said the highest law in the land, basically tongue in cheek and with bitter irony, that everything else is a sop, is lip service, criminal justice system, policing system, detective work, evidence. We've got ministers, we've spoken about, Jonathan, who are presenting their budgets to committees, who are
Yeah.
compromised, ones who've taken money from VBS. We have a vice president who is connected through family to a dodgy national lottery deal. We know that the national lotteries has been corrupt from top to bottom for years, maybe more than a decade, thanks to groundwork. And what we are seeing is obviously, as you said, Ramaphosa moving with the speed of a glacier, everyone being reactive. You asked me what I think is possible. I think that Ramaphosa and representative of the ANC will do all they can to not do anything. And if something happens, it will be because they're forced to make a decision. Yeah, and we're going to talk more about this, but I'm starting to think, Jonathan, all these parties, starting with the DA, have held their nose from the GNU down to local government councils, which we'll talk about. And almost every party in the country is in some or other kind of relationship with the ANC. At what point, because we as the public don't have the power of recall, we aren't being, and we are certainly not going to be granted those powers by the ANC and the DA anytime soon. No threat to their power or their countenance. So at what point does the stink from the ANC become too much even for its coalition partners? If anything, for me, could be a walkout for the DA from the GNU, I would think it would be something like this. But that would require some integrity, which is in short supply from all our parties at the moment.
I think you make a very good point, Paul, because that's where I was going. I mean, let's just sort of track back a bit because Senzo Mchunu's spokesperson responded, said that they need to conduct an investigation as a police ministry. There was nowhere mentioned that it would be any kind of independent investigation. Senzo Mchunu was actually released a statement today, again through his spokesperson, denying that he knows Vusumuzi Kat Matlala, but indicating that he does know, sorry, should I say, Brown Mokgotsi, and that Brown Mokgotsi is quote unquote a comrade, which is interesting and damaging for him because he has admitted in Parliament before that he does not know Mr. Mokgotsi.
Well, he's not the first ANC minister now, is he, Jonathan, to have made two contradictory statements in Parliament this year?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. But let's go to your point. So it would seem that the decisive action would immediately be, I would think, an independent inquiry into this matter with speed. It's difficult when you sort of set up an inquiry because it obviously would have to involve a retired judge or a member of the judiciary. You mentioned earlier on that the judiciary is sort of compromised in this matter, or they have been named and cited. So you'd have to choose sort of members of any commission very, very quickly. I would also think, and this is in fact what I mean, I think the DA has called for this matter to be debated in Parliament. The IFP has called for an independent inquiry and for the police minister to be suspended. And I would think that that probably should happen immediately, pending any investigation, and give South Africans the confidence that we're putting in place someone who's not tainted. Obviously, people need to be innocent until proven otherwise. But I don't think with allegations of this nature, with the kind of detail that the provincial commissioner went into, I don't think it's tenable for the police minister to be in that position right now.
No.
But just picking up on where you left off, I would think that the DA would drive this issue vigorously. So Ian Cameron, who's their spokesperson on police, is driving the issue, but he's obviously not a executive member of the Government of National Unity. If there was red lines, real red lines, we spoke about red lines and whether they are sort of drawn and real and not. This is kind of a red line matter. You're absolutely right. If I were in the DA, I'd be advising that our prominent leaders would actually really, really drive this hard, force accountability from Ramaphosa, force Ramaphosa to make decisive action. I mean, if he's getting rid of Andrew Whitfield for not getting permission to go on a trip to the US, but again, he's allowing Senzo Mchunu to remain in post without suspension, and he's waiting for all these sorts of investigations and deliberations and whatnot. You'd think the DA would swoop in incredibly hard and say this is absolutely not on. And this is also the kind of thing, again, without sort of any instant public opinion polling, it's always difficult to know how pervasive these kinds of stories get into public's mind. But you would think this is the kind of issue on which coalition partners, such as the DA, the IFP in particular, from a KZN, given that it's political killings, the IFP are affected by this, would get tainted by association. And this is the kind of issue that it would actually make sense to really draw a very, very strong red line. But you've got to be prepared to walk away from government, and as we discussed last week and have intimated for you before, there probably is no willingness from the DA right now to leave government. From their point of view, it's benefiting. But I, to be honest, can't see that when something like this comes up, and if this is found to be truthful, no political party worth its salt can actually remain in coalition with a criminal enterprise that could be the ANC if these allegations are proved correct.
100%, Jonathan. And I think it's a shame that the opposition is in such a shambles that, and we could touch on it later, time permitting, but if the DA and EFF, for example, if there was a basis of a foundation for them to work together, which Action SA is calling for in KwaDukuza now and has been calling for in local government for a long time, you would have a viable alternative. But the problem is with the ANC at 40% and MK at 15%, making 55 in total nationally, you have to pick one devil over the other. And I think what the ANC has been banking on with the DA and other GNU partners is this is the better devil. But, say what you will about MK, I wouldn't go into a coalition with them. They're chaotic. It's a family business, all the things we said. But the ANC has proven itself through time and time again. It is a criminal organization. It is caught in a catch-22, Jonathan. It is not really a case. It's not an option for the party to place Mchunu on suspension and to get someone clean in, because the reason he's there and the reason that there have been other tainted commissioners and ANC members in this position from Cele and before is because they are there to fulfill a function, and the function is to stop anything that could be a proper investigation that would hold consequences for the party. So the ANC will not make a decision. Ramaphosa will not make a decision. Um, I really fear for what will happen. It will be a reaction. It won't be something decisive. If Ramaphosa acts, I think his hand's going to have to be pushed.
Yeah. And it's going to be very hard to push his hand, because I think the other thing that we've sort of neglected to mention thus far is that the police minister himself is a figure that is highly involved in the succession battle for the ANC elective conference in 2027.
Yeah.
Moving against him could be interpreted to mean a whole host of things. And Ramaphosa is obviously desperate to walk this very fine line to get to December 2027 without sort of invoking a massive, well, there are massive internal fights and it's all happening behind the scenes, but he doesn't want that to spill out into the open and to threaten the very, very fragile nature of his governance, already under threat, as we again spoke about last week, with people not wanting this GNU to exist.
I think
Ramaphosa, yeah, sorry, Paul. Yeah,
this is
last word
just
on
this
this. Yeah,
assumption, I think, that we smuggle in all the time, that we know that Ramaphosa's first loyalty is to the ANC
yeah.
because, and he said it many times. So,
Mm.
and we thought, well, he's going to act and he's going to preserve the ANC. I don't think the ANC can be preserved, and the country is suffering as a result. So nothing will happen and nothing will be achieved.
Yeah. On that depressing note, probably onto something even well, not wouldn't say more worrying, because it's equally worrying. Is the Trump tariffs, and again, I think Ramaphosa and the government caught completely flat-footed. So I think most people will be aware by now that the deadline for the Trump tariffs to come back with the sort of period of status quo ended today, actually, being the 9th of July. And Trump, in a very strangely worded letter, were basically indicated that from the 1st of August, South Africa is going to face 30% tariffs on its imports into the United States, with some exceptions. I think platinum and gold minerals, which the US deems important, but this is going to hit the sectors such as citrus, the wine industry, and of course, critically, the automotive industry. The South African government and the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Competition were completely surprised. They had obviously presented some proposals at the infamous visit to Washington, and then subsequently at a recent U.S. Africa Business Summit in Angola. They'd received no response. And then they were hit by this. They've asked for another 90 days so that they can negotiate a trade deal. Obviously, it's important to locate this. This is not just South Africa that's received damaging news. It's a number of countries. Japan, I think Korea, South Korea has also received it, although they got 25% tariffs. Trump has alleged in his letter that it's because of South Africa's punitive sort of tariffs on American imports, but the facts don't bear that out. I think at most there's a lot of US goods that don't have any duties imposed on them, and I think the highest duties are about 7.6% on US goods. So again, Trump is trading in some very dodgy and sketchy information. But the fact of the matter is these tariffs are damaging to the economy. They're damaging to agriculture. They're damaging to the automotive sector. They're damaging to the wine export sectors, other export sectors. They're damaging to business confidence. And I think John Steenhuisen, the Minister of Agriculture and DA leader, sort of indicated, I think it was yesterday when he was presenting his budget vote in Parliament, that effectively what these tariffs mean is that AGOA is dead in the water, and there's sort of no hope of that being revived. My question again, Paul, and I suppose it's somewhat rhetorical and it's a question of frustration, is what on earth is Cyril Ramaphosa, Parks Towers, the trade industry and competition minister and their teams doing? Why are they so flat-footed? Why are they surprised? The classic thing is we are shocked. I just something and it's not enough to say, well, let's ask for an extension. I'm still not seeing any strategy, any understanding of properly how to deal with the Americans. And then also we need to get onto this. There's no clear idea of what the plan B is in terms of diversifying and sort of other exports. We're not being taken into confidence. We're not being treated as adults, I don't think, by our governments. And it's frustrating and worrying. We're very worried on crime. Now there's a huge economic hit coming, which is not going to help the growth and jobs mantra that everyone's so desperately craving. Sorry that I've gone on for so long, but I just find this profoundly irritating.
It's very worrying, Jonathan. It's irritating, but it's worrying. It's tens of billions of rands of export value, and it's tens of thousands of jobs that risk being lost. A lot of the jobs in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, as you said, within key agricultural sectors and the automotive sectors. The automotive industry has never been healthy in South Africa, Jonathan. It's relied on years and years of support. Um, Tax breaks in a hope that it would grow out of its infancy into something bigger. This has been a hope for 25 years. And if we cannot export these vehicles to the US, Jonathan, there was an article today, I think it was Davy wrote it, it may have been another economist, claiming that this could be the death knell for the sector. Uh, I don't know what the political fallout is, but remember that Nelson Mandela Bay is where a lot of these automotive jobs are located, also Buffalo City
Yeah.
as well. So that's a huge concern. You ask, what is the government doing? Park Style, what he's been in the news for is not working on trade and industry, but awarding the National Lottery's license to Mashatile's sister-in-law. Before that, I remember him as the mayor of Johannesburg, I think from 2011 to 2016. During his time here, I first started noticing the streetlights going out and not being repaired. Just to give you an indication of the track record that I remember, the highlights from his career. That being said, Jonathan, it's notoriously hard to conclude new trade deals.
Mm.
Um, Before the Trump madness, it would often take, it does, it takes years to negotiate deals. They're worked out very carefully. The biggest potential markets, when I say biggest potential markets, countries which would have the money and the desire to buy our goods, particularly agricultural goods. I think we've said before, the EU under the Common Agricultural Policy
Yeah.
is one of the
Yeah.
most protectionist agricultural policies in the
Yeah.
world, probably the biggest, hardest market to crack. Um, Trade, you quoted tariff figures. I agree. We do actually have fairly low tariffs. The devil is always in the details. Often countries, including us, but will will have very high tariffs for select lines of goods. Obviously, we can maintain zero tariffs for 70% of the world's goods that we don't import. That's not
Mhm.
hard. And any country can do that and claim a low average tariff. But when you start to look at the goods where we have a comparative advantage, very hard to crack those markets. We've said before, I think, Jonathan, it's not a case of saying, I was exporting 2 billion rands worth of wine to this country. I'll turn around and look for markets for my wine. It is a legal mess of red tape, and agricultural goods in particular are amongst the most protected by the developing world.
Yeah. Wandile Shashlobo is obviously a great agricultural economist, writes a great Substack and would highly recommend readers and listeners subscribing if they don't already. Was listening to him earlier this morning actually on the very fact you're saying, because a lot of people are saying, well, we just simply need to diversify. Yes, we do need to diversify, but it's not as he's basically saying it's not as simple as saying, okay, well, we can pivot to China and China can represent or can fill up what we're missing from America. It's incredibly difficult. China actually also, like the EU, has its own protectionist approaches. You'd be looking at tariffs 15 to 20% on agriculture and things like macadamia nuts he was mentioning. And then of course you've got just the months and years that it takes to negotiate trade deals, and there's always a distinction also between tariff deals and trade deals. Trade deals are obviously a lot more complicated, plus all the supply chain logistics and operations that go into shifting and pivoting. So it's not so simple. And again, just points to the fact is, do we actually have a very clear trade and industry or trade diversification strategy that we are pursuing? Doesn't seem clear. What I
I'm not
think, yeah, go for it, yeah.
My brief thoughts, not as an expert, have studied trade and I have worked in some sectors that rely on export, Jonathan. I don't think we've diversified. I think when the economists say path dependency, for most of the 20th century, we depended on mining and some slight beneficiation of the minerals that we mine. But most of the time, it's the raw ore pretty much that gets shipped off. We do have some sophisticated niche sectors, but mostly we rely on these primary exports
Mm.
of goods.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, probably just an idea for us is to get a guest on down the line who we can sort of who's an expert on trade and can talk a bit more in detail. We are more on the political economy side of things, which is where I'll actually turn as well, because I think what a lot of people have probably been missing in this whole Trump tariff things is the international geopolitical side of it. What's notable is the deadline was always going to be the 9th of July, so this always was going to happen. But the BRICS summit is taking place, or has taken place in Brazil. The BRICS countries released a kind of mutual statement, which in effect had a go at the Trump approach on trade, which can't have pleased the Americans. Trump posted on Truth Social, sort of saying that, if BRICS were going to sort of continue with their policy and approach, he would add an extra 10% onto whatever tariffs that he's imposing. And so he's had BRICS. He doesn't like BRICS, and BRICS is very much in his line of sight because it's a center of power. In addition, and I often mention this, we forget the dislike and distrust of South Africa that there is in Washington because of what is perceived to be our foreign policy, our proximity to Iran, are taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. Benjamin Netanyahu again was in Washington this week, nominating Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. It's always interesting when South Africa gets punished by Trump, Netanyahu is visiting Washington. I don't know if it's just a complete coincidence, but it's worth noting. And what again strikes me is, since Ramaphosa's meeting in the Oval Office that we obviously chronicled and spoke about, no ambassador has been appointed to replace Ibrahim Rasool, as far as I'm aware. And what's happened to Mcebisi Jonas, our special envoy? Where is he in all of this?
Good question, Jonathan. Yeah. One that I don't have an answer to. I know that when Trump spoke about slapping extra tariffs on us, he was referring to, I think, this growing anxiety in the US that one day in the future, maybe sooner than it thinks, the dollar would stop being the reserve currency. Because one of the BRICS
Correct. Yes.
policies is to look, if not to create, I think this would be too ambitious, a general BRICS reserve currency, that trade should happen in domestic currencies. Now, that's got wider implications. A lot of the US's monetary policy and economic policy is predicated on the idea of having reserve currency. From everything from increasing the money supply and not having to worry about inflation as much as, say, countries like Argentina and Venezuela, whose debt was always denominated in dollars. But now we are getting very geopolitical. The truth is that BRICS could be a threat, Jonathan, because China by itself is the second largest economy. BRICS together, I think the population and the GDP, or the GDP growth for sure, of recent history is definitely near 50%. If we could coordinate amongst ourselves, and I think when you talk about what's the plan B, intra-regional trade between the BRICS countries could go a long way. But again, that could be complicated. Don't know how enforceable it is, and the deals take a while. But if we're going to all be branded together by the US administration, maybe we should work together more. Because East Asia
Mm.
has definitely not let the grass grow under its feet. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, China, Korea, South Korea, and Japan have been working very hard to conclude a big deal. Three enormous economies, three huge historical rivals, but the existential mutual threat, common threat of Trump has made them want to work more closely and integrated. And that's going to, I think, be the biggest secondary effect of the Trump tariff policy. I hope we are not too slow. I hope our leaders are not too slow to move on that.
Yeah. Well, that seems like an entirely sensible path. And again, maybe relating it to politics and the GNU. I think John Steenhuisen said some very sensible things in his budget vote uh, tabling this week. Again, you would think, and sort of offering some thoughts to the DA leadership, not that they may want to take me up on this, but this again is a wonderful issue to drive, is to say, have someone like John Steenhuisen, who holds the portfolio of agriculture minister, which is critically affected by this, saying, let's actually pull together as economic clusters to work on, can we solve the US issue with clearer and more decisive action? And then what is the famous diversification path, and how do we actually make BRICS benefit and drive that from an economic angle, showing South Africans what the dangers are? Because again, my worry with all of this, when you, and myself included, you see tariffs, your eyes glaze over. How does all of this work? The question is, is the ordinary South African, they're getting that Trump is hating on South Africa, but what are the economic implications? What are the economic implications, as you alluded to, Paul, on the ground in Buffalo City Metro and Nelson Mandela Metro? And I think there's a golden opportunity for opposition parties to actually drive this issue in rands and cents terms and translate it onto the ground. On
Yes,
the subject, yeah, go for it.
and remember that the biggest growth that we saw in 2021 election, Jonathan, was the growth of new smaller parties like the Northern Alliance, who famously, Gary van Niekerk wore the mayoral chain for a long time. I think they only have 3 seats out of 120, but located in those working class northwestern suburbs of Nelson Mandela Bay that are critically dependent on the automotive sector.
Yeah. So on the subject of Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, let's shift to by-elections now. So last week, there was a by-election in Ward 57 in Motherwell in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. It was an ANC seat. I think the ANC sort of faced a significant independent threat, if I remember correctly, in the 2021 election, but on a PR vote, they had been relatively strong. Last week, the ANC defended the ward relatively comfortably, got 62% of the vote, but was down from the 75% it achieved on the PR vote in election 2021. I don't think anybody would have been surprised by the ANC taking the ward, but what was incredibly interesting for me was that the EFF and MK both got 16% of the vote. I think the EFF slightly ahead of MK. MK obviously would not have contested this ward that didn't exist in 2021, but they did contest the 2024 provincial election votes in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. They only got about 1% in the ward, so they've increased again. There's obviously turnout differentials and issues, but what is really, really fascinating, and this sort of picks up on a consistent trend we've been discussing, Paul, is that Motherwell, Nelson Mandela Bay Metro is definitely not a Zulu voter stronghold at all, completely outside of the MK's comfort zone. But they've been able to make significant inroads, and quite clearly, it would seem, they've taken votes away from the ANC in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. I think that's again an important trend. People often talk about the chaos that MK is having internally. Again, I mentioned that they may be in complete strife. You spoke earlier on about how hopeless they are as an official opposition.
Yeah.
Electorally, though, in terms of the rands and cents of elections, which is votes and by-elections at this point of view, they're building momentum across the country.
They are, Jonathan. They are. I mean, that's the simple answer. They're appearing in the Northwest, they're appearing in the Western Cape. This Motherwell ward is now the Eastern Cape from nowhere. Let's talk very quickly. Turnout dropped from about 42 to under 30%. I think it was 26,
Right.
27%. And the field in the by-elections does thin out. I think there was an ANC, an EFF, and an MK candidates. I think that was it.
And Bosa,
So,
I think Build One South Africa contested as
and
well.
you're
Yeah.
right. You're right.
Mm.
We did mention it. How could I
Yeah.
forget? So it is a narrower field. I don't want to take away from MK's growth. It's definitely growing outside, as you said, the epicenter of KZN and the southeast part of Mpumalanga from last year. I'd love to know why. I'd love to be able to ask an MK voter, what was it? Is it a protest vote? Are there enough vote? I don't, I think it's silly to say there'd be enough voters that just don't like the ANC or the EFF and the MK is the best
Mm.
solution. I wouldn't want to project from my own personal feelings. And I'd probably choose the EFF over the MK, but it's not about me. So what is the reason behind the growth? And I don't know if we know why yet, but it's definitely happening.
Yeah. And I think we have a not nearly as much as we would like, but we have a decent number of quantitative polls in South African politics that come out once in a while. What we're missing is qualitative insight, and I agree, Paul. It would be fascinating to sit down with an MK voter in Motherwell, with an MK voter in Saldanha Bay, in the Western Cape, where they also did well, and actually understand what is motivating and what is the reason for MK over the EFF and the DA, as you say. There are three by-elections taking place as we record this today. All three of them are DA seats. One in Metsimaholo, Ward 14, two in Tshwane, one in Ward 44, which is the Ferry Glen area, relatively safe. So I think the DA got over 70% in this ward, also over 70% in the ward in Metsimaholo in 2021. There's another ward in Tshwane, which is DA Ward 98, Teresa Park, which seems to have been far more marginal, with the DA winning with 42% of the vote, but the opposition vote split almost equally between the ANC, Vryheidsfront Plus, and Action SA. In today's by-elections, and I'm interested by virtue of our focus on the metros in Tshwane. So, again, notable that Action SA is sitting out both by-elections in Tshwane, despite holding the mayoralty and despite, at least in Ward 98, recording a decent foothold in the ward. So I wonder if that's strategic or whether it's cash and resources related. But it would seem that the DA's sort of big opponents is the Vryheidsfront Plus, certainly in Ward 14 and Ward 44, and probably the ANC in Ward 98. Although, as I think you pointed out, Paul, the EFF ran the ANC pretty close for second place in last year's election. But do we think the DA probably on track to retain these three wards? I mean, what's notable about some of these kinds of by-elections is the very, very low turnout that's been recorded in safe DA wards. I don't know about the more marginal one. When it's very, very low turnout, the DA's organizational strength, and it's a by-election machine. The way that they're able to identify and turn out their supporters would probably point towards the DA being relatively safe and comfortable in at least two of these three wards, Paul.
Yeah, if I had to take a guess, Jonathan, and remember, I've been wrong on the podcast before. I would guess, yeah,
We all have.
Well, both of us. I'd guess that, as you said, there'll be a low turnout in the Metsi Maholo ward, which, by the way, is Sasolburg. Metsi Maholo is that
Right. Good
northernmost
point.
part
Yeah.
of the Free State, just south of the Vaal River. And as you said, in Ward 44 and Fairy Glen, I'd expect a low turnout. I think turnout in Ward 58 is going to be much higher. It's a much more crowded field. As you said, there's an EFF candidate, ANC, DA, Vryheids Front Plus. There's the One Heart movement. We'll talk about them another time as a fun diversion. And there's an independent candidate. I think it will be crowded. Um, you asked why Action SA didn't field a candidate. They didn't do badly, but they are only in, I think, fourth or fifth place in the ward.
Right.
And,
Right.
as you said, if you're looking at 2021, ANC and Vryheids Front Plus are probably the biggest contenders for second place, the EFF as well. And I do think it comes down to resources, Jonathan.
Yeah.
If you're not the ANC or the DA, and they don't stand in every ward, but yeah, I really think it comes down to resources, which
Yep.
underlines MK's success. Did they just set up a really good beachhead in Motherwell, or are the sins of incumbency of poor council direction by the ANC and the EFF over the last couple of years, is that coming back to haunt them? I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, again, interesting. No, I think the point about resources is right and fair. And when you're a smaller party like Action SA and having to contest a by-election, more of your national resources are sort of taken up. I mean, what a party like the DA has at its disposal is it'll have a lot of activists. It has a by-elections team. I don't know if it still does. I would assume it still does, that actually specializes in contesting by-elections. So your big sort of national heavy hitters continue doing what they normally do, and they're not taken away from their day job to contest a particular by-election. Whereas an Action SA, a Build One South Africa last week in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, pretty much their headquarters will be diverted into contesting these by-elections, which obviously imperils your ongoing sort of national strategy. So I think it's a entirely valid point. We'll obviously watch the results very, very closely when they come out and talk and reflect on them earlier. It's going to be interesting to see how the Freedom Front Plus does, or Vryheids Front Plus, should I say. Has the DA managed to keep on to that share of the vote that it effectively won back from the Vryheids Front Plus? But we'll watch that. Let's shift now down the M1 to from Tshwane to Joburg. It obviously would not be a real National Dialogue podcast without a little section on Johannesburg. We
Yeah.
are unapologetic about that. Paul, a new speaker, well, maybe not so new, but a new speaker elected recently. Tell us a little bit what's been happening in Joburg.
I will, but if you'll just pardon me, Jonathan, let me just rub my temples and mentally prepare myself. As a long-suffering Johannesburg resident that loves the city and its people, but okay. So here's a potted history. Last week, Margaret Arnolds from the Africa Independent Congress was voted in as Speaker in the Johannesburg Council. It was a secret vote. There were IEC officials, there were ballot boxes, there was an argument on the podium, there was a recount of the vote, at least one, and all of this information came to us. If you're not following her on Twitter, Alex Patrick, who works for News 24 and covers the Joburg Council beat, excellent resource. But it's a mess. Now, Jonathan, we are wasting IEC resources. We don't have enough money to run a general election, but because the clowns and the criminals in the Joburg Council don't trust each other enough to vote the right way, we now have secret ballots and all sorts of things. I hate secret ballots, Jonathan. I think they're inimical to democracy. I think the DA set a terrible precedent when they demanded secret ballots for motions of no confidence against Zuma back in the day. A discussion for another time. This is Arnold's second shot as Speaker. All right. Remember that last week or the week before, in late June, Action SA's Nobuhle Mthembu was removed as Speaker. Action SA and the ANC grew tired of each other. Arnold's was MMC of Finance while Mthembu was Speaker. But before Mthembu was Speaker, Arnold's was Speaker. So this is Arnold's second shot at being Speaker, having been MMC of Finance in between for a couple of short months, where she presented the draft 2025-26 budget. I wrote about it. I didn't have a lot of nice things or complimentary things to say about the speech itself or her delivery of it. But anyway, she's no longer Finance MMC. We need a new Finance MMC, which is going to be its own bit of fun and games. We'll talk about that now. But Arnold's is back as Speaker. Now, I'd like to give you some kind of idea. When Arnold's was voted back as Speaker, it made some factions in the ANC happy. It made some factions unhappy. And it also made Herman Mashaba unhappy. And it was probably the final straw for Action SA and the ANC parting ways. But that was on the cards anyway. They had grown tired of each other. They had grown apart. I want to show you very quickly my idea of what the current coalition looks like in Joburg, so we can get an idea of some of more of the fun and games. Here's the visualization, Jonathan. Is what I'm calling the fourth Joburg coalition. We had a DA-led one, we had an ANC-led one, that we had Al Jama, and then we had Action SA in, but not in, but they were the Speaker, and now they're out. So, at the moment, ANC with 90 seats. And remember that these figures, unlike some of our competitors, Jonathan, include the two by-elections in Joburg, where the PA won a seat off the ANC and off the DA.
Right.
ANC originally had 91, DA originally had 71.
71.
And the PA had 8, now they have 10. Bigger players, serious players. ANC have got 90, EFF have got 29, PA have got 10, and the IFP have got 7. These four parties are currently represented in the mayoral committee. And as obviously there's an ANC mayor, there's also an AIC speaker. So you'll see these four parties alone, Jonathan, the yellow smarties, the red ones, the purple ones, the black ones, we're already over the majority line very narrowly. And when we say that Arnold's was elected very narrowly, it was probably the rump of these parties plus the 2 seats that Arnold's party herself has, the AIC. Now, Al Jama's is conspicuous by its absence here. They're in the coalition, but there's talk that they should be given the Finance MMC position now. I think Tapelo Ahmed has been mentioned as a name. We know he did such a fantastic job as a part-time mayor, as Al Jama's first part-time mayor of Joburg. I speak sardonically and with great on my tongue, Jonathan. He would be a compromise candidate if he were called in. At the moment, it's just another example, more circles within circles, more ANC factions fighting. From what we can see from the comments of the anti-Dada Morero ANC regional leaders, Jonathan, that Arnold's was originally Morero's choice as Finance MMC. He famously shuffled her from Speaker when he was elected mayor, which caught many by surprise. And he's been accused by his detractors of having someone that he can control. Right. He's also, as part of one ANC faction, fighting with other ANC factions in the Gauteng region for the new choice of ANC Finance MMC. And he obviously wants an MMC that he can control, according to his detractors, who want, Loyiso, we will confirm the name, who's currently MMC, I think, of Group Finance in the city. We'll confirm that. So what's happening, Jonathan, is we're having reshuffling. Morero promised reshuffling when he gave his State of the City address a few months ago. He said it would be great if everyone got a chance to learn a little bit about a new position. And I've always thought it's a terrible idea. I'm starting to feel and suspect more strongly that rotating people out of critical positions has got the exact same effect of Zuma doing it at the national cabinet level, is to create confusion, to break continuity, and to bury accountability when it comes to a critical portfolio like finance. I think it's ludicrous that we had Arnold's as Finance MMC for a few short months. She delivered the budget. Now another person is going to have to come and take control of the budget. I know it's supposed to be executive and group decisions, but it's just an example of, to the ANC and to most of its coalition members, positions are sweets and party favors, and they're not responsibilities. And if you'll indulge me for 10 more seconds, Jonathan, because this rant has been building since March 2023. The other smaller parties that haven't been mentioned, right? The EFF is responsible for what's going on in Joburg. The Patriotic Alliance, definitely. The IFP now as well as part of this rotten administration. And of course, the AIC. But the ATM needs to be mentioned, Jonathan. COPE needs to be mentioned. We'll follow Colleen Magobela as she travels to MK. And Good. I am proud to say I successfully convinced a close family member not to vote for Good last year based on the damage that they did as part of one of the ANC coalitions in Joburg. And I will speak out against any party, specifically in Johannesburg, that is in league with the ANC.
Thanks, Paul, and it's a very impassioned as ever, but useful update. I think the Loyiso Musuku, who's currently the MMC for Group Corporate and Shared Services or something along those lines. But as ever, and this is the theme of the podcast for the citizens, it's not good news. It's not focused on what's best for the city. As you say, positions are being doled out like sweets, as all part of ANC factional games. I think it's entirely valid, as we were doing at national level, to say that parties that are part of this coalition should be tainted, and their record as a coalition partner of the ANC in this mess needs to be thought of and considered when you go into the ballot box next year for the local government election. It's yeah, I mean the PA, IFP, have some explaining to do to their constituents, as do the EFF and the other smaller parties that you've mentioned. I think Action SA, so Action SA would say, well, we weren't in coalition, we just had the speakership, but essentially they were de facto also supporting. So it's notable that they are firmly in opposition to Dada Moreira, and of course they abstained in the motion of no confidence against him and the council chief whip a couple of weeks ago, which obviously led to them losing the speakership. I presume, Paul, sort of deferring to your knowledge and judgment in the local government space, that the dynamics in the city of Joburg will still have very little implications on the coalition arrangements in Tshwane. I presume that will obviously keep Action SA need the ANC there, and it's obviously based on a sort of council by council position. But
I think that's correct, Jonathan. I think it's a free for all. I think it really, as you said, changes council to council.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, in Johannesburg, people are still sitting without water. Johannesburg city centre continues to be a mess. The infrastructure is not being repaired. The street lights are not working. And Johannesburg desperately needs a government that actually knows what it's doing, has a vision, and can get the basics right. And it's a theme of this podcast that we often say there's just too long a time now between now and a local government election, which sadly looks like it's probably going to deliver another visualization for you to show us that is full of different smarties, different arrangements, but potentially what could be different about next year is that the ANC may be forced out of the ability to form a government, and will that have a change? One can only, for the citizens of Johannesburg, yourself included, hope that is the case.
Jonathan, I think if the opposition parties individually and collectively can grow up, mature, and find each other, then you can put an end to the rotten misrule of the ANC. The numbers are there now. In KwaDukuza, as we said, the ANC's got 29 out of 59 seats. They are one short of a majority. Action SA over there is exhorting the DA and EFF to find each other and work together. As long as the ANC can pick off the opposition members one by one, it's currently in coalition with the single AIC councillor in KwaDukuza. It's a familiar story. Of course, pushing the ANC below 35 or 30% or 25% would make their job easier, but you've still got to have grown-ups around the table among the opposition parties.
No, you do. And and again, just to repeat myself, the local government election could be as late as February, beginning of February 2027. People need to find themselves, be mature enough, because there are South Africans suffering through not actually getting the services that the Constitution entitles them to. So yeah, Paul, thank you again. It's been a long but I think helpful tour through politics, both at a macro national, touching on geopoliticals, right down to local government level. Hopefully, there can be a few little glimmers of positivity that can come into the next episode. But thanks again to everybody that's tuning in to listen, that's reading our stuff on the South Africa Brief. Again, we'd love for you to share with others, invite others to subscribe, and also like us, comment on our podcasts, comment on our pieces on Substack. Let us know what we can be doing better, what topics you'd like us to discuss, and also what kind of people you'd like us to get on as guests. We mentioned that probably important to get a trade expert on to sort of understand a bit better what the implications of these Trump tariffs are. But if there are other subject experts that you recommend we have on, please do let us know. But Paul, thank you as ever for your time, and good luck for the week ahead in the city of Johannesburg.
Jonathan, always a pleasure to speak to you. We always seem to speak about the topics, obviously the serious ones that upset and exasperate us, but it's always a pleasure to ventilate the issues with you. I'd like to echo your call. Please, if you are listening, if you're watching, please do be part of the community. Speak to us. Tell us what you'd like and not like and who you'd like to see, and be part of the conversation.
Right. Until next week then. Thanks, everyone.